Hey everyone! Today we're diving into an interesting chapter of history known as the Migration Period, or the Barbarian Invasions. This era, from around 300 to 600 AD, was a time of massive movement and upheaval across Europe. Imagine tribes on the move, the fall of the mighty Western Roman Empire, and the birth of new kingdoms. So, what kicked off these migrations? It all started around 375 AD when the Huns stormed into Europe from Asia. This set off a chain reaction, with tribes like the Franks, Goths, and Alemanni moving into Roman territories. But it wasn't just about invasions. These groups settled and shaped new societies. Historians debate when exactly this period began and ended, but it's generally marked from the Huns' invasion to the Lombards' conquest of Italy in 568 AD. Yet, some say it stretched from as early as 300 to as late as 800 AD. As Rome's central power crumbled, the military grew in importance and was often filled with non-Romans. This shift played a big part in the empire's downfall. While Western Rome fell, Eastern Rome, or the Byzantine Empire, held on until 1453. The migrants came in tribes or war bands of 10,000 to 20,000 people. Though it might sound like a lot, they were just a fraction of the Roman Empire's 40 million population. Germanic tribes like the Goths and Vandals led the way, later followed by the likes of the Huns and Slavs. Later waves included the Vikings, Normans, and even the Mongols, each leaving their mark on Europe and beyond. And now let's look at the Germanic tribes before their big migrations. Long before they started moving in large numbers, these tribes lived in southern Scandinavia and northern Germany. Around 1000 BC, they began spreading out, heading west and south. By 200 BC, they pushed the Celts west to the Rhine and moved into southern Germany, eventually butting heads with the Romans. This wave was documented by historians like Tacitus and Julius Caesar. Another wave saw Germanic tribes moving east and south from Scandinavia between 600 and 300 BC, settling along the Baltic Sea and up the Vistula River. Over time, these tribes formed larger groups through alliances and intermarriage, becoming the Alemanni, Franks, Saxons, Frisians, and Thuringians. Now, on to the first big wave of invasions from AD 300 to 500. This period, partly chronicled by Greek and Latin historians, saw Germanic peoples taking control of much of the Western Roman Empire. One notable event was in 376, when the Tervingi crossed the Danube to escape the Huns. After a clash with Roman forces, they rebelled, and the Visigoths, who emerged from this group, eventually sacked Rome in 410 and settled in Gaul and Iberia. Following them, a mix of tribes under Odoacer deposed the last Roman emperor in 476, and the Ostrogoths under Theodoric the Great settled in Italy. In Gaul, the Franks gradually moved into Roman lands and, under leaders like Clovis, established a powerful kingdom that would later become the heart of France and Germany. Over in Britain, the Anglo-Saxons began settling in the 5th century after Roman control ended. Meanwhile, the Burgundians moved into northwestern Italy, Switzerland, and eastern France. The second wave of migrations from AD 500 to 700 saw Slavic tribes spreading into Central, Southern, and Eastern Europe, transforming the region demographically. Turkic tribes like the Avars and Magyars also joined in. The Avars, along with the Lombards, destroyed the Gepid kingdom in 567, with the Lombards settling in Italy and later being joined by the Bavarians and Franks. The Bulgars, originally from Central Asia, migrated west due to pressure from the Khazars and established dominance in Byzantine territories along the lower Danube in the 7th century. This significantly altered the demographic landscape of the Balkans, making it predominantly Slavic. Around the same time, the Croats and Serbs settled in modern-day Croatia, Bosnia, and Serbia. By the 9th century, Bulgars invaded and settled in parts of the Central Balkans and Albania. Meanwhile, during the Byzantine Arab Wars, Arab armies attempted to invade southeastern Europe but were repelled at the Siege of Constantinople by the combined forces of Byzantium and the Bulgars. The Moors, a mix of Arabs and Berbers, invaded Europe via Gibraltar, conquering Hispania in 700, but were halted by the Franks at the Battle of Tours. This set the stage for the long-lasting frontiers between Christian Europe and the Islamic world. Finally, the Hungarian conquest of the Carpathian Basin around AD 895 and the Viking expansions marked the last major movements of this era. Christian missionaries gradually converted these new arrivals, integrating them into Christendom. So, as we continue exploring the migration period, let's talk about how the identities of these so-called barbarians were formed and expressed during their movements. Historians have had many debates about what exactly barbarian meant and how these groups saw themselves. Herwig Wolfram, a noted historian of the Goths, pointed out that the term Volkerwanderung, which means migration of peoples, was first linked with Migratio Gentium by Michael Schmidt in his 1778 History of the Germans. This term, and the concept it represented, evolved over time. Even during the early Middle Ages, the idea of gens as a biological community was changing. This was further complicated by our modern understanding of nations, which was shaped significantly during the French Revolution. In the 19th century, the prevailing view was primordialistic. Scholars like Johann Gottfried Herder believed that tribes were coherent racial entities with a unique core identity and spirit, reflected in their art, literature, and language. This was the Romantic ideal that envisioned a single ancient people with a shared homeland and tongue. This view supported political movements like Pan-Germanism and Pan-Slavism. However, starting in the 1960s, scholars began reinterpreting the evidence. Researchers like Goffert and Todd suggested that these Germanic tribes didn't see themselves as a unified group. This idea, known as modernism, argued that what we consider distinct ethnic groups were actually social constructs formed through shared political and economic interests, rather than bloodlines. Modernists proposed the concept of imagined communities, suggesting that these barbarian groups were not static entities, but were created through processes called ethnogenesis. This term, popularized by the Austrian school led by Reinhard Wenskis, refers to the formation of tribal units by a core elite group. These leaders used metaphors of kinship and common ancestry to gather followers and build larger political units. Interestingly, the widely recognized maps showing the movements of these tribes can be misleading. These migrations didn't happen in a straightforward, continuous manner. There were periods of inactivity and hibernation, where traditions were forgotten and later revived. The term Volkerwanderung is often used in German historiography to describe these migrations. In contrast, French and Italian historians often use terms like barbarian invasions, reflecting different perspectives on these events. French and Italian scholars tend to view this period as catastrophic, marking the end of civilization and the start of the Dark Ages. On the other hand, German and English historians often see it as a rejuvenation of Europe with a more dynamic and martial culture. Several theories have been proposed to explain why these barbarians appeared on the Roman frontier. Some suggest climate change, population pressure, or a domino effect caused by the construction of the Great Wall of China. Others argue that the fall of the Roman Empire itself created the conditions for these migrations. The historian Guy Halshaw, for instance, sees the movement of these groups as a result of the empire's collapse, not its cause. Archaeological evidence supports the idea that these tribes were already settled agriculturalists before they moved into Roman territories. Many groups were drawn into the empire's politics and conflicts, with the Romans using allied barbarian armies as buffers against other hostile groups. The nature of the barbarian takeover varied across regions. In some areas, local rulers simply handed over military control to the newcomers. In others, there was more conflict and anarchy, especially in places like Gaul and Spain. The Eastern Roman Empire struggled to maintain control over the Balkans, which eventually led to the colonization of these areas by Slavic warriors. Overall, the breakdown of Roman political control exposed the weaknesses of local rule, leading to a variety of responses from different regions. While the Western Roman Empire saw the integration of these groups into a Romanized society, the East maintained a more distinct and Spartan existence. So as we can see, the migration period was a complex and dynamic time, with various interpretations and theories about what drove these massive movements of people.